Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. And today we're tackling something a little bit different, but I think something we can all relate to,
Yeah.
and that is figuring out the right problems to solve.
Hmm.
We've all spent time trying to fix something only to realize we were barking up the wrong tree.
Oh, absolutely.
And you sent in some research on this, so that's what we're going to be diving into today.
Awesome.
Really going to unpack some key ideas and techniques to help you define the right problems to solve. So
Yeah.
where do we even start with this?
So I think that the core idea here is that it's not enough to just be good at solving problems.
Right.
In a world overflowing with information and data,
Yeah.
the real skill is being able to identify the right problems to solve in the first place.
Okay, that makes sense. But
Yeah.
how does that play out in real life?
Yeah. So imagine like a company that's struggling with low customer satisfaction.
Okay.
They could jump to solutions like offering discounts or revamping their marketing. But what if the real problem lies in a clunky website design that frustrates customers? So by digging deeper and identifying the root cause, they can create a much more effective solution.
So it's kind of like treating a symptom versus curing a disease.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can pop a painkiller for a headache, but if the underlying cause is stress, the headache's going to keep coming back.
100%. And speaking of getting to the root of things, one technique that's really helpful for this is called the 5 whys technique. Have you heard of this?
I have heard the name,
Okay.
but honestly, I'm not entirely sure how it works.
Okay, so it's surprisingly simple,
Okay.
but incredibly powerful. You basically keep asking why, like a curious toddler, until you peel back the layers and get to the core issue.
Okay. I like where this is going. Walk me through it.
Okay, so let's say you're that company with the low customer satisfaction.
Okay.
You notice that customers are complaining about long wait times for customer service.
Mm-hmm.
So you ask, why are customers experiencing long wait times?
Okay.
Well, maybe the answer is because we don't have enough customer service representatives.
Right.
So you ask, why don't we have enough customer service representatives?
Okay.
And maybe the answer is because our hiring process is slow.
Oh.
And you just keep asking why until you get to a root cause that you can actually address.
This is making me think about that example from the research you sent about the hospital with the long wait times in the ER.
Yes, that's a perfect illustration.
Mm.
They initially thought they needed more doctors and nurses, but by using the 5 whys, they discovered the real bottleneck was in their patient intake and triage system. Patients weren't being assessed and prioritized efficiently.
So by fixing the intake process, they could improve wait times without necessarily needing to hire more staff.
Exactly.
That's brilliant.
It is, and it shows how powerful this simple technique can be for uncovering the real problem hiding beneath the surface.
Okay, I'm sold on the 5 whys, but before we get too deep into techniques, let's zoom out for a second. The research mentions something called data synthesis. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so data synthesis is all about gathering information from various sources to get a holistic understanding of the problem.
Okay.
It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. You might have pieces of information from market research, customer feedback, your own experiences, industry trends, and you need to fit those pieces together to see the full picture.
So it's not just about relying on one source of information, but looking at the problem from multiple angles.
Exactly. And the type of information you gather will obviously depend on the problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
If it's a business problem, you might look at sales data, customer reviews, and competitor analysis. If it's a personal problem, you might reflect on your own past experiences, talk to people you trust, or research different approaches.
This is starting to feel like detective work.
Yes.
They're gathering clues and evidence to build a case for what the real problem is.
I love that analogy, and just like a good detective, you need to be aware of your own biases and assumptions.
Oh, yeah.
We tend to see what we expect to see, so it's crucial to be open to different perspectives and interpretations of the data.
So we've talked about data synthesis and root cause analysis. What's the next step in this problem-defining process?
So once you have a good grasp of the problem, it's important to consider the stakeholders.
Okay.
Who's affected by this problem, and what are their needs and perspectives?
This makes me think of that classic example of Henry Ford and faster horses.
Yes.
He realized that people didn't actually want faster horses. They wanted a faster and more efficient mode of transportation.
That's a great example.
Hmm.
Ford understood the underlying needs of his stakeholders, and by reframing the problem, he revolutionized the automobile industry.
So by understanding your stakeholders, you can avoid creating solutions that miss the mark and instead develop something truly valuable.
Precisely. And that leads us to the final step in this stage of the process, crafting a clear and actionable problem statement.
That sounds important. What makes a good problem statement?
So a good problem statement is concise, specific, and focused. It clearly articulates the problem you're trying to solve, who's affected, and what the desired outcome is.
So it's like a mission statement for your problem-solving mission.
It's exactly. It acts as a guiding light, keeping everyone on the same page and ensuring your efforts are aligned toward a common goal.
This is all starting to click now.
Good.
But before we move on, I'm curious, what are some common pitfalls people fall into when trying to define problems?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll dive into after a quick break. Stay with us.
All right, we're back and ready to dive into some of those common problem-defining pitfalls. I know I've definitely fallen into a few of these traps myself.
Don't worry, we all have one of the biggest pitfalls is what we call solution jumping.
Oh, yeah.
It's that temptation to jump straight to solutions before we fully understood the problem.
Oh, yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. It's like, okay, problem, got it. Here's my brilliant solution.
Exactly. It's a natural human instinct to want to fix things quickly.
Right.
But just like in medicine, if you misdiagnose the problem, the treatment won't be effective.
Right. So how do we resist that urge to jump to solutions prematurely?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the 5 whys technique, data synthesis, stakeholder analysis. These tools help us slow down and really understand the problem from multiple perspectives before we even start thinking about solutions.
That makes sense. It's like building a strong foundation before you start constructing the building.
Exactly.
What are some other pitfalls to watch out for?
Another common one is mistaking correlation for causation. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean that one caused the other.
Ooh, can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, so imagine a company notices that their sales increase every time they launch a new marketing campaign.
Okay.
It's tempting to assume that the campaign is causing the sales boost. But what if there's another factor at play, like a seasonal uptick in demand?
Ah, so you need to dig deeper to see if there's a real causal link or just a coincidence?
Exactly. And speaking of digging deeper, we can't forget about those biases. We all have confirmation bias, for example. It can lead us to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs, even if it's not the full picture.
Right, so how do we avoid letting our biases cloud our judgment?
One way is to actively seek out diverse perspectives.
Yeah.
Talk to people who have different viewpoints than your own, challenge your own assumptions, and be open to being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's also helpful to have a structured process for gathering and analyzing information, like the techniques we've been discussing.
So having a framework can help us stay more objective. The research you sent also mentioned something called systems thinking.
Yes.
Can you explain how that relates to problem definition?
Yeah, so systems thinking is all about understanding how things are interconnected. It's recognizing that a problem rarely exists in isolation.
Okay.
Instead, it's often part of a larger system with multiple interacting parts.
Okay, that sounds kind of abstract. Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure, let's say you're dealing with traffic congestion in a city.
Okay.
A narrow view might focus on adding more lanes to the highway. But a systems thinking approach would consider how that traffic problem is connected to other factors, like public transportation options, urban planning, even commuting patterns.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture and understanding the underlying dynamics that are contributing to the problem.
Exactly. And by understanding the system, you can identify leverage points where even small changes can have a ripple effect and create significant improvements.
That's fascinating. It's making me think about all the different levels at which good problem definition can have an impact. We've talked about businesses, but what about individuals? How does this apply to our personal lives?
It's just as relevant, if not more so. Think about the challenges we face in our relationships, our careers, our personal growth. Often we struggle because we haven't taken the time to define the real problem.
So instead of arguing with our partner about whose turn it is to do the dishes, maybe we need to ask, why are we both feeling so resentful and overwhelmed right now?
That's a perfect example. By digging deeper, you might uncover a deeper issue related to time management, communication, or shared responsibilities.
Wow, this is really making me rethink how I approach problems in my own life.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the surface level issues and miss the underlying causes.
It is. But with the right tools and mindset, we can all become much more effective problem solvers. And the beauty of it is that these skills are transferable to any area of life.
I'm curious, are there any other frameworks or models that complement the ideas we've been discussing?
There one that's closely related is design thinking. It's a human-centered approach to problem solving that emphasizes empathy, experimentation, and iteration.
Okay, I've heard of design thinking, but can you break it down for me in the context of what we've been talking about?
Sure. So design thinking starts with Deeply understanding the needs of the people you're designing for involves observing their behavior,
Well,
interviewing them, really getting into their heads to understand their motivations and pain points.
so it's all about empathy and understanding the user experience.
Exactly. And then it's about generating a wide range of potential solutions, prototyping those solutions, testing them with users, and iterating based on feedback. The very cyclical and iterative process.
I can see how that ties in with what we've been discussing about data synthesis and stakeholder analysis. It's all about gathering information, testing assumptions, and refining your understanding of the problem.
Precisely. And design thinking emphasizes the importance of not being afraid to fail.
Yeah.
The process is all about learning from your mistakes and continuously improving.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for tackling problems in a more effective way. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we discussed earlier, the problem statement.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on how to craft a really effective one?
Of course. So a strong problem statement should be clear, concise, and focused. It should avoid ambiguity and clearly articulate the problem you're trying to solve.
Okay, that makes sense. But what are some practical tips for actually writing one?
A helpful framework is to think in terms of who, what, where, and why.
Okay.
Who is affected by the problem? What is the specific issue they're facing? Where is this problem occurring, and why is it important to solve this problem?
So it's like creating a mini brief that outlines the key elements of the problem.
Exactly. And by answering those questions, you'll naturally create a problem statement that is focused and actionable.
This is all starting to come together. Now we've covered a lot of ground today, from the 5 whys technique to systems thinking to design thinking. But before we wrap up entirely, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the future holds for problem definition. What trends or technologies do you see on the horizon?
That's a great question, and one we can explore further after a quick break. Stay tuned.
So we're back, and I'm ready to hear your thoughts on the future of problem definition.
Okay.
Any exciting trends on the horizon?
Well, I think we're going to see technology play an even bigger role in
Wow.
helping us define problems more effectively.
Like how?
Imagine AI-powered tools that can sift through mountains of data
Right.
and identify patterns that humans might miss,
Oh, wow.
or platforms that allow for real-time collaboration and feedback from stakeholders all over the world.
That would be game-changing. We could get to the heart of these complex problems so much faster.
Exactly. And I think we'll also see a growing emphasis on the human side of problem definition.
Okay.
Things like emotional intelligence and the ability to understand diverse perspectives will become even more crucial.
Because at the end of the day, even with all the fancy technology, it's still humans who are defining the problems and coming up with the solutions.
That's right. We need to strike a balance between leveraging technology and nurturing those human-centered skills.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the power of problem definition.
Me too. It really is the foundation for effective problem solving in any area of life.
So before we wrap up, let's recap some key takeaways for our listeners. What are the most important things to remember about defining the right problems?
Okay, so first and foremost, resist the urge to jump to solutions.
Right.
Take the time to thoroughly understand the problem before you start brainstorming ideas.
Yes,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to ask why multiple times. That 5 whys technique is a simple but powerful tool for uncovering root causes.
It is.
And remember to gather information from a variety of sources.
Yeah.
Don't rely on just one perspective or data set. Synthesize information from different areas to get a holistic view.
Exactly.
And don't forget about your stakeholders. Understanding their needs and perspectives is crucial for creating solutions that actually work.
Very important.
And finally, once you have a good grasp of the problem craft, a clear and concise problem statement, this will serve as your guiding star throughout the problem-solving process.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So for our listeners specifically, I want to encourage you to think about the specific problem that you're trying to solve and how you can apply these principles to really get to the root of it.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to experiment and iterate. The more you practice these skills, the better you'll become at defining the right problems and creating truly impactful solutions.
I completely agree.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And until next time, happy problem solving.